Hi guys, I'm a private chef in the Hamptons and I'm gonna show you what I make my clients for dinner. Okay, so dinner is not for a while, but I'm gonna start making the bread now because bread takes a long time to rise. I'm just making like a simple crusty white bread because I'm gonna make Cioppino, which is a seafood stew. I'm using like mussels and shrimp and some cod, and it's like a tomato-based stew, and it goes really well with some crusty white bread. I have 500 grams of bread flour. Bread flour is also called strong flour in the UK and has a higher protein content, which means that it develops more gluten, which is kind of like the stretchy strands that you want to have a good crumb. If you use all-purpose flour, for example, you'd get like a cakier bread. So I have my yeast here. I'm using instant yeast, but you can use active dry. Instant yeast is great because you can put it straight into the flour, but I actually do like proofing it a bit just to kind of get it moving. So a little bit of warm water and a little bit of sugar. Yeast feeds off of it, and I'll show you what it looks like when it starts to bloom. So this is what it looks like right now. The water that I'm using to bloom the yeast is my already measured out water for the bread. You don't want to use more water on top of the water you've measured out because bread is a little bit finicky in that you need to kind of be kneading it and seeing if it needs more or less water. So I wouldn't add even more water with the yeast. Even though it seems like a small amount, it makes a difference. It's like a fairly humid and wet day today, so I'm gonna put in 3/4 of the water measured, and then if I need more, I'll add in more. And this just ensures that I don't get too sticky of a dough. Bread making is a bit temperamental in that you need to kind of be okay with being flexible with the measurements and stuff depending on what the flour dough needs. Sometimes it needs more hydration, sometimes it needs less hydration. See that it's starting to bubble, and there's these little like formations of yeast kind of blooming, like these little dots. It's gonna start smelling kind of yeasty like bread. Also, I would say don't ever forget salt while baking bread. Salt gives color, it gives taste, it helps strengthen the gluten, and it kind of controls the rising process. It's one of the most important ingredients in bread making. You always want to mix the salt into the flour before adding in your yeast, because if yeast goes directly on top of salt, it can kill the yeast basically. See, it's become completely cloudy and kind of foamy in a way that it wasn't, so that's all activated. I have melted butter, and this has been melted and cooled. You don't want to be hot because again, that can kill the yeast. Butter is just to add a bit of softness to the bread and also to add a bit of taste. You know, it's just a little bit of fat, it coats the palate a bit. You add in your yeast mixture. And see all of this left over, you want to make sure you get that all out of the bowl, right? Because that's all yeast that's going to help our bread rise. So I just take some of the pre-measured water and just swirl it out. And the butter then, and then 3/4 of that water. The more water you're able to work with into your dough, the kind of softer and more better crumb you'll develop, but you don't want it to be wet. So I'm just mixing this together with a wooden spoon. See, that's really dry, so I'm going to put in more water. Still not all of it. When I was in culinary school, I had to keep telling myself, be brave with the water, be brave. But if it's your first time making bread, then I would err on the side of putting less in, and if you need more, you can add more. Once it's basically combined, I'm gonna take it out. I think I can add in all my water. Yeah, I can be brave. If you're having a hard time kneading because it's sticking to your hands, best tip I can give you is to keep your hands clean, so keep washing them and drying them. This way the dough can't stick to any of the sticky stuff on your hands. I'm just gonna knead this 4 to 5 minutes until it starts springing back, and I'll show you what that looks like. See, I'm finding it a bit difficult, so I'm gonna wash my hands and then start again. And if you have one, a dough scraper can make life a lot easier because it becomes much easier to pick up the dough. And this is the kneading motion that I use, keeping my hands clean. My bread has risen. Can I just show you? I don't think I've ever made a bread this perfect before in my life. Hello. Some time got into it, but wow, so nice. It's definitely doubled in size. So before I go get this stuff at the grocery store, I'm gonna do this because once your dough has risen, you want to knock it back because you don't want it to overprove. If it gets too risen, then what can happen is that when you bake it, it'll just deflate because the structure has gotten way too out of control and it just won't be able to hold itself. Just gonna, oh my god, how satisfying is that? And I'm gonna knock it back, which means I'm gonna kind of like take out the air. Why are you taking out the air? Actually, what I'm doing is I'm just kind of dispersing these large bubbles evenly throughout the dough, and this will make sure that it'll be like an even sort of crumb versus like a big bubble here, a small bubble here. So it's kind of tense now because I've kind of worked it. I'm gonna just let it rest for 5 minutes. This will help the gluten just relax, and then I'm gonna shape it. What I'm doing right now is I'm gonna shape it, which means that I'm basically giving it enough structure and tension so that when it bakes, it doesn't go like, it'll stay in a nice round shape. So you want to kind of bring the dough around. And what I like doing is taking my pinkies and kind of pinching a little of the dough and then scraping it under. This allows a lot of surface tension to create under the dough. So here I am just kind of scraping and bringing it in. And I kind of want like a loaf. So I'm gonna... And you don't want to do this with any flour on the surface because it's going to be really hard for you to sort of get that surface tension. Kind of like that. I almost think I should have knocked it back a little bit more because I have these bubbles there. I'm gonna maybe just to make sure. Okay, so that's my little loaf. This is the seam side, this is the smooth side. I'm just gonna pinch the seam side just to make sure it doesn't split open. I have a baking sheet with some parchment paper and I'm just going to place it right on there. When it comes time to bake, I'm gonna put it in the Dutch oven just like that, which will make it very easy. Cover this with some oiled cling film and it's gonna rise until double its size. I have all of my seafood here for the Cioppino stew, which is basically a seafood stew and like a tomato base with seafood stock. I got whitefish, cod, shrimp with the shells on, which I'll tell you why. Got some little neck clams and I got some mussels. For the clams and mussels, to clean them a little bit is you're gonna put them in a bowl and you're gonna make sure that they're all closed. If any are open, that means they're dead and they're not safe to eat. You wanna make sure there's no cracks or chips or anything. And then for your mussels, if they're in a plastic bag, take them out ASAP because basically mussels need these holes to basically breathe because they're still alive. Again, just make sure they're all closed. See this one, how it's slightly open? I'm just gonna tap it and it's alive because it closed back up. So if it's open, just do that and see. See, it's open. So I'm just gonna see. Yeah, it's alive. It closed back up. I'm now gonna cover these in cold water and some salt, and this will basically mimic salt water and it'll help the mussels and clam purge out all the sand and grit for like around half an hour to an hour. And that is just gonna chill out now. Okay, so I have my large shrimp here, and the reason why I asked for them with shells on is, I hope I pronounce it right, Cioppino. I googled the pronunciation for it. It uses seafood stock. I couldn't find seafood stock anywhere for some reason, but anyway, I kind of wanted to make my own, but I wanted to make like a shrimp stock. And shrimp stock is really easy and it only takes half an hour to make. So you basically take shrimp shells, and usually I leave the tails on, but I'm actually gonna take them off. So I have my shrimp tails here, right? And I'm just gonna put them in a pot. I'm gonna saute them to get some flavor in them and then bring them to a boil and they'll simmer for half an hour, and that's your shrimp stock. Sorry for my mispronunciation. Cioppino. Okay, so my dough is ready. You can see how wobbly it is, like that. Wobbly. When you poke your finger in, it should kind of leave the dent in there, and that's how you know it's done. Sieve some flour over this and then make like a quick cut, and then I will put it in the oven. You ideally want to be quick and confident with this, two areas where I sometimes lack in. You want to make sure you have a sharp knife, preferably a razor. This might go sideways, I'm not very good at doing. But you only make one cut. You do your cut and you live with it. Like that. That was pretty good. I could have been a bit deeper with it. No, I said not to touch it. I'm gonna listen to myself. This is what it looks like going into the oven. My oven's been preheating at 425. I've had a Dutch oven in here that's been preheating, which is very important because you want that initial burst of heat. Okay, so work quickly here. Put it straight into the Dutch oven. My Dutch oven's a bit on the small side, I'm not gonna lie. Throw 2 ice cubes in and shut the lid. It's straight back into the oven. Make sure the lid's on tight. And put it in the oven. Sorry, that was really rushed, but I'm gonna explain each step to you now. So the Dutch oven was preheating in the oven because it's hot, you'll get that initial burst of heat that will really help the bread rise right away. The flour on top of the loaf was purely for aesthetic reasons. You can absolutely leave it out. It might help a bit. It just has a nice contrast of like light flour and then the dark crust. And I put the ice cubes into the Dutch oven behind the parchment because when the ice melts, it releases like a burst of moisture, steam basically, which helps it rise and it helps create a better crust while keeping a softer loaf. And the cutting of the bread was because you basically want to create a weak point in the bread for the steam to release from. If you don't, the bread will pick a weak point and it'll just like create a crack where the weakest point of the bread is. So this is just like a controlled release of steam, and that's gonna bake for about 20 minutes with the lid on, and then I'm gonna take the lid off to get like a really nice crust on it. A pan with some olive oil. I have an onion quartered, and I have my shrimp shells, and I'm just gonna cook this and caramelize this. And the reason why you do this extra step of caramelizing rather than just cooking it in the water is because we're creating another layer of flavor that will help get the shrimp stock really flavorful. Also, leaving the skin on for the onions will lend itself like a really nice, like kind of deep golden brown color, which I really enjoy, but you can leave it out for a lighter stock. This is about the color you want, and I'm gonna add 5 cups of water to this. And you want to bring this to a simmer. I'll show you what that looks like for at least 30 minutes so that the flavors can get extracted. Dicing up some fennel because Cioppino, I keep calling it Cioppino. Cioppino has a very fennel-y base and acidity, like kind of tastes like licorice, and I don't like licorice, but I love fennel. I'm just gonna dice this into some dices. So that is what a simmer looks like. See, there's movement below, but it's not coming onto like a rolling boil. You want it to be simmering so that it's like extracting flavor. I'm also just dicing up some onions. It has a much like sort of sweeter, more milder flavor than white onion, really nicely with the sort of light flavor of shellfish. Here I'm just caramelizing my shallots and my fennel. Once it's nice and caramelized, stir in some fennel seeds, red pepper flakes, and some chopped garlic. I have a dry white wine. Pinot Grigio is great, Sauvignon Blanc, something like that. Don't spend a lot of money on it, but make sure it's something that you would drink. It's honestly not a great bar for me considering I drink most wine. This one was actually really good, and a dry white wine and the acidity will go really, really nicely with the light flavor of a shellfish soup. 2 cups of wine went into the shallots and fennel, and you want to reduce that down until you can't smell the alcohol anymore. So my bread was out of the oven at that point, and if you ever find it too soft, just put it back in the oven on the rack and it'll be fine. Deveined shrimp, you basically want to take a knife and just make a slit on the back, and if there is kind of an intestinal tract, pull it out. Sometimes there's not and you don't have to devein. Once the alcohol is reduced off, I then added in 1 can of whole peeled tomatoes and crushed them with my hand. Then I also added in my shrimp stock, making sure to strain it, but then also press the solids through the strainer so that you get all the good stuff out. That's how simmers for about 30 minutes to increase the flavor. Bread should be really crispy and it should sound hollow when you knock on it, and this basically means that it's cooked all the way through and it should feel light for its size, which is very important. I'm just cutting my cod up into some nice big chunks, and then I salted them on both sides. I also drained my mussels and rinsed them with new cold water. I then put my fish in, and then I put in my shrimp, my mussels, and my clams, and I put it to a simmer and I put the lid on. This will cook for about 7 minutes. While that was cooking, I sliced up my bread. I was honestly really happy with the texture, but it was a bit close textured at the bottom. Might mean I could have just kneaded it for a bit longer, or maybe needed slightly longer and proof. But honestly, it looked really good. I was pretty happy with it. I'm just being picky for the fun of it. When you take the lid off your stew and the mussels and clams have opened up, then it's basically ready. Remember, if any of the mussels or clams didn't open, don't try to force them open and eat them. That means they're not good to eat. Topped it with some parsley and a squeeze of lemon juice with the bread cut in half. I think this might be one of the family's favorite dishes that I made so far for them. Thanks for watching. I really hope you guys enjoyed.